Imagine carrying a quiet fire inside you, one that you never let burn, a dream you never speak of, a desire you bury so deep that even you start to forget it's there. On the surface, you look calm, composed, maybe even disciplined. But beneath that stillness, something stirs. Something that refuses to die just because you decided it shouldn't live. This is what repression feels like, when the heart whispers and the mind silences it. We tell ourselves it's strength. That controlling desire means we've conquered it. But what if that control is just another form of denial? What if every desire you repress doesn't disappear, but simply waits, growing roots in your unconscious, twisting quietly until one day it begins to change you from within? Desires are not just urges or impulses. They are messages from the psyche, signals of what you long for, what's missing, what's deeply human inside you. To repress them isn't just to silence a thought, it's to silence a part of yourself. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, called repression the cornerstone of the unconscious. He believed that much of human suffering, anxiety, neurosis, compulsive behavior, comes not from what we desire, but from what we refuse to admit we desire. We build walls around those desires, lock them away, and convince ourselves they never existed. But the psyche is stubborn. It finds ways to leak through the cracks. A repressed longing can return as anger. A forbidden wish can disguise itself as anxiety. A silenced passion can mutate into apathy. The energy never leaves. It just changes form. Have you ever met someone who seems perfectly composed, always rational, always fine? Yet, there's a strange tension beneath their smile? That's repression in disguise. The emotions never expressed don't vanish. They ferment. Psychologists call this emotional displacement, when the mind redirects forbidden desires into safer outlets. You might repress your desire for intimacy and instead throw yourself into work. You might suppress creative impulses and instead become hyper-controlling in your daily life. You might bury grief or love and instead feel inexplicable irritation at the smallest things. You tell yourself, "I've moved on." But your body knows you haven't. The body keeps score. Literally. Neuroscientists have found that repressing emotions activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center, while suppressing the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for calm regulation. Over time, this imbalance can lead to chronic stress, insomnia, fatigue, even immune dysfunction. So repression isn't strength. It's self-harm disguised as discipline. Yet society rewards repression. We're taught from childhood to hide what's inappropriate. Boys are told not to cry. Girls are told not to want too much. Desire becomes something shameful, dangerous, or selfish. And so, generation after generation, we internalize that suppression as virtue. But here's the truth. Desire itself isn't the problem. Desire is life's movement through us, the impulse to grow, to connect, to create, to experience. It's the soul's language. The problem arises when we identify with desire, or when we reject it entirely. Both extremes lead to imbalance. When you become enslaved to desire, you lose clarity. When you repress desire, you lose vitality. In both cases, you stop listening to yourself honestly. Carl Jung, Freud's student and eventual rival, had a profound insight on this. He said, "What you resist persists." Whatever part of yourself you deny, sexuality, ambition, creativity, vulnerability, doesn't vanish. It sinks into the unconscious, becoming part of what Jung called the shadow. The shadow isn't evil. It's simply the parts of you you've disowned. But the longer they stay buried, the more they begin to control your behavior from beneath awareness. That's why you might find yourself sabotaging relationships, fearing success, or feeling inexplicably empty. You think you're making rational choices, but in truth, you're reacting to unseen forces within. To repress desire is to give it power in the dark. Let's pause and imagine something. Imagine standing before a locked door in your mind. Behind it are the things you've never allowed yourself to feel. The anger, the lust, the ambition, the envy, the need for love. You hear them whisper sometimes, especially in silence, especially when you're alone. What would happen if you opened that door, not to indulge, but to listen? You might discover that desire isn't demanding chaos. It's seeking acknowledgement. Most desires don't need to be acted upon. They need to be understood. Because the psyche doesn't want suppression. It wants integration. Integration means allowing the truth of what you feel to exist without judgment. To say, yes, I want this, or yes, I'm afraid of this, without labeling it as good or bad. Only then does desire lose its destructive potential. Because when you see it clearly, it stops controlling you from the shadows. But repression is seductive because it feels safe. It gives us a false sense of control. To repress is to believe you've mastered yourself. But mastery without honesty is just a more elegant form of fear. The Stoics, often misunderstood as emotionless philosophers, actually understood this well. They didn't teach repression. They taught awareness. Epictetus said, "Freedom is not achieved by satisfying desires, but by removing your dependency on them." Notice, he didn't say, "Deny your desires." He said, "Don't be ruled by them." That's the difference between repression and transcendence. Repression is fear-based. It avoids. Transcendence is awareness-based. It understands. When you repress, you push emotion down. When you transcend, you rise above it by first allowing it to exist. Think about what happens when a child wants something and is scolded. They don't stop wanting. They just learn that wanting is dangerous. They carry that into adulthood, learning to mute themselves to stay safe. And soon, their life becomes a performance of who they think they should be instead of who they truly are. That's the quiet tragedy of repression. It kills authenticity. It turns the human being into a mask, polite, acceptable, but hollow. Yet, buried desire never dies quietly. It waits and it finds cracks. Sometimes it bursts out in moments of rage, in impulsive decisions, in affairs, in addictions, in creative explosions. The psyche finds ways to restore equilibrium. That's why the midlife crisis exists, not as a cliché, but as a psychological correction. It's the soul's rebellion against decades of repression. Suddenly, the person who's lived correctly their whole life begins to feel restless, disillusioned, hungry for something they can't name. It's not immaturity. It's the unconscious demanding to be heard. So the question isn't, how do I stop wanting? The question is, how do I understand what my wanting is trying to tell me? Because every desire carries information. Your desire for success might be asking for self-respect. Your desire for love might be asking for self-acceptance. Your desire for escape might be asking for peace. But you can't decode these messages if you've trained yourself not to feel them. And this is where psychology meets spirituality. Many ancient traditions, Buddhism, Stoicism, even Christian mysticism, don't see desire as something to repress, but as something to refine. They teach that desire is raw energy, and that through awareness, it can be transformed. The Buddha didn't teach that desire is evil. He taught that attachment to desire causes suffering. The difference is subtle, but profound. The desire itself isn't the enemy. It's clinging to it, fearing it, or denying it that creates pain. Modern therapy echoes this wisdom. Mindfulness-based approaches teach that acknowledging emotion reduces its control over you. Studies in effective neuroscience show that naming a feeling, simply saying, "I feel angry," or "I feel longing," reduces amygdala activation and increases prefrontal regulation. Awareness is liberation. So when you repress a desire, you're not erasing it. You're just turning away from an opportunity to understand yourself more deeply. Imagine if, instead of fighting against your desires, you learned to sit with them, curious, not judgmental. You'd start to see patterns, which ones come from wounds, which from love, which from conditioning. You'd start to separate truth from noise. And slowly, repression would give way to integration, where every part of you has a place at the table, even the messy ones. Because that's what healing really is, not perfection, but wholeness. When you allow your desires to be seen, they stop being your enemies. They become guides. Desire says, "This is where I hurt." Desire says, "This is where I dream." Desire says, "This is what I've been too afraid to ask for." And if you listen, truly listen, you begin to live, not as a fragment, but as a whole. Because repression doesn't make you moral. It makes you numb. Expression doesn't make you reckless. It makes you real. The key is to balance honesty with responsibility, to express without harming, to understand without indulging blindly, to live with awareness rather than avoidance. Maybe that's the real definition of freedom, not doing whatever you want, but being conscious of why you want it. So pause for a moment and ask yourself, what have I been repressing? What truth within me have I decided doesn't deserve to exist? And what would happen if I stopped running from it, not to act on it, but to hear it? Because every time you silence your desires, you silence your potential for growth. In the end, repression is not strength, it's fear pretending to be discipline. And the moment you start listening to what you've buried, you begin the real journey, not of controlling yourself, but of knowing yourself. And that is far more powerful. Call to action, outro. If this reflection made you pause, if it touched something buried inside you, then maybe it's time to listen to what your silence has been trying to say. Like, share, and subscribe if you want more deep dives into the psychology of what makes us human. And remember, repression hides pain, but awareness transforms it. So don't just survive your desires, understand them.